Hi, everybody. I'm really, really, really happy to be here. I'm going to start on a lighter note. I learned three wonderful things today. The first is my new favorite phrase in Australian Sign Language: impossible dragon blood. It's just so cool. The second is I learned what a bandicoot was. I didn't know this was an actual animal, and please treasure them. They're very cute. The third was I didn't know that squirrels aren't a thing in Australia. That was new to me, and we'll treasure the squirrels in America. I came halfway across the world from Los Angeles to be here because I care deeply about community. And the community that's been developed here is one that's incredible. It's impactful. It's compelling other communities here and governments to ultimately influence them around their understanding and education relating to suicide, suicide awareness, and healing, and supporting grief and trauma. I'm here because there is no more important issue to me than mental health support, and healing for my happiness. And I'm going to go further into that in a sec. I want to start with grief. My father dying by suicide wasn't my first experience with suicide. My first experience with suicide was when I was 12 years old. My best friend and cousin shot himself. Okay. He was 13 years old. And I didn't know how to process that as a 12-year-old. I didn't do what I needed to do at that time to process the trauma, because I didn't know trauma was a thing. I didn't know 12-year-olds experience trauma. No one told me that, hey, this is not okay for you. You need to start dealing with it and other issues. And it manifested in all sorts of ways in which I later came to realize, hey, that's unchecked trauma. And so I spent my early adult life repeating that cycle of not managing that trauma, not understanding that there was grief that I had to experience and process and the like. And there were other events that started to accrue over time, and they'd ultimately spill over in terms of my mental health considerations. When my father died by suicide, that's when things spilled over. I found myself diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and depression, and was using very unhealthy means to manage those, like self-medicating, using things like alcohol. And through that experience, I did initially what I thought was essential for my health and well-being. I thought, I'm gonna show up for other people because that's what I need to do to take care of myself. I'm going to establish a way in which we can grieve, that I can manage my grief and we can grieve publicly, because it's what my father would have wanted. We had the good fortune and double-edged pain of sharing him with the world. And through that process, I started understanding that my experience of grief was something that I was sharing with the world. And I wasn't grieving privately. I didn't establish a process to manage my own personal grief, and I ended up trying to show up for other people because I felt that what was necessary, because I felt like that was the way initially to my healing and taking care of myself. And initially when I started, the thing that didn't register with me was that I felt that taking care of myself was a selfish act at the time, right after my dad passed away. I felt I needed to show up for other people because I can show up for myself later. The challenge with that is I burnt out. I was traumatized, was depressed, I was anxious, and I wasn't showing up for myself in the way that I needed to because I thought it was selfish. And I paid a dear price for that. Through that experience, a couple things came from it. One was, I started understanding service was extremely helpful for me in my path to healing. In fact, I became a mental health advocate because I started to realize that being vulnerable, taking the opportunity to share my story, was something that ultimately I could draw and derive strength from. Coinciding with that, I started understanding I don't need to view taking care of myself as being selfish. I can view it as an act of self-love. And I started reconfiguring my approach to thinking about that because the thing was, I couldn't be of service in the way that I needed to be of service if I wasn't taking care of myself. And that little insight for me was what started as a small act became a sea change in how I started looking at how I could take care of myself. And I started, through the mental health advocacy experience, looking at the systems at play and the culture of stigma, and realized that in America, but also throughout the world, we have a long way to go. And I realized that I had to be vulnerable. I had to share my story, and I was fearful. I was worried that I was going to be judged. I was worried that I would lose friends. I was worried that I'd be seen as broken and defective. And it couldn't be further from the truth, because when I started sharing my story, people started reaching out to me and say, "Thank you. I appreciate what you're doing. And I'm deeply grateful that I can be vulnerable and share, because yes, it's part of my healing process, but it helps me develop and further my understanding as a student. As we learn more about the systems at play and what's going on culturally, I started understanding that there was an entirely different way that we had to view how we look at change within our systems relating to mental health and mental health impact. Through the pandemic, those issues relating to our collective mental health exacerbated. And as a suicide survivor, and as part of the suicide survivor community, I realized, wow, we have a lived experience and a learned experience where we can take our experience and start establishing a lens of healing, not only for ourselves, but to be of service. Because we owe it to ourselves to be happy. And for me, that happiness is derived from service. I can't speak for everyone here, but if I wasn't able to start the process of prolonged grief, and when I say prolonged, it's a very specific thing, because I didn't actually give myself the time to grieve until about 1.5 years after my father passed away. In hindsight, I wish I had started grieving privately sooner, but I also realized that the process of grief is one that can take time, and there's no limit to what that can look like. That said, for me, there came to a natural evolution of how I was processing the grief, and that ultimately turned into carrying on a legacy of what I believe my father stood for. It's different how I apply it. In my father's case, if I would boil down everything he did to a phrase, it would be to help people laugh and to help people learn. In my case, it's service is the path to happiness. And I take that to heart because I deserve to be happy. We deserve to be happy as a community. And as suicide survivors, we have every opportunity to grow, learn, and develop a path to happiness through experiencing and processing the trauma and the grief. And the thing I realized through my personal processing is that the way in which I could establish vulnerability in sharing my story and sharing what I went through and the like ultimately became a deep source of resilience and strength. I thought initially it was the complete opposite. I thought me sharing, me being vulnerable was a source of weakness. And as I've come to learn more about stigma and how we view stigma and biases, I realized I still have stigma in terms of my perceptions. I still have biases. They happen, they crop up. But you have every opportunity to acknowledge them and process them and work through them. It's not about completely removing the stigma and just moving on from it. The thing is, we need to say, hey, I'm feeling this way. I'm experiencing this anger. I'm experiencing this frustration. I'm experiencing fear. And that's okay. It's part of a process, and it can be an extended process. There's no fixed time to managing through this. And what I've learned over the past, at this point, 7 years, I've been applying service to my way of being, is there's so much more to do. I can speak to what's going on in the United States, and as I'm learning what's going on in Australia and other parts of the world, we are not investing enough in ourselves and our mental health systems to get to where we need to be as a community, as a culture, as populations in dire need of support from this, as it's been well framed, this shadow pandemic. And I hope that the people in the audience can start understanding the strength and the ability that they have at their fingertips to heal themselves, and through that process to become healers in their own right. I'm not saying, hey, it's your mandate to become a healer. I'm saying you must heal yourself. You must find opportunities to take care of yourself if you want to start the process of showing up for others. I didn't do it for myself, and I paid dearly as a result, to the point where suicidal ideation was something that I would consider. And it turns out that it was me ultimately not taking care of myself that led me down that path. And when I think about my father and the time we spent together, I saw him as one of my best friends. As an entertainer, yes, he lived to laugh, to help people laugh, to help people learn. And he found it funny too. But as a father and as a friend, the things I appreciated most was his thoughtfulness, his commitment to learning about people, to listening. The memories I have that most filled me with joy are the quiet times. That's who I saw. That's when I saw him as a father and a mentor and a role model for me. And through my personal process of healing, the thing that's become an overwhelming feeling is gratitude. I am deeply grateful of the time I got to spend with my father and what he taught me as a son and a human. I now seek to practice a daily exercise of gratitude which I just list out the things. It's almost like a meditation. List out the things I'm appreciative of. My ability to be of service. My kids, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, Mickey and Zola. I can show up for them every day in the way that I need to. Clear-eyed. All sorts of other things. My family, my friends. My ability to be of service. That process of gratitude for me was one of the most healing things I could apply to my daily rituals. Because as I learned over time, mental health hygiene was something that I needed to apply every day. Not just once a week. Not just for, an hour session with a potential therapist or a coach or something. It was something I needed to work through every single day. And I started framing it in my own little system, thinking about how nutrition, fitness, mindfulness, meditation, therapy, community support, self-organization, establishing an organized space in which I can feel comfortable. All these things were things I started applying on a daily level. And that mental health hygiene ultimately enabled me to further my advocacy work. And now when I think about things in terms of a systems level and supporting things like community initiatives, political initiatives, and changing policy, media campaigns, and the like, I break it down into programming, supporting, ultimately, the development of resources and curricula that people can better learn about mental health and apply to their daily lives. So programming, awareness, which are the campaigns relating to raising awareness and education around mental health. Awareness, that's number 2. Research, developing a deeper understanding of evidence-backed approaches to managing mental health. That's the 3rd, research. And advocacy, building the coalitions and the communities that can apply the appropriate approach to strategy and making a difference and impact. That's 4, advocacy and policy. That's educating stakeholders around what they can do to better support law and the like to help make a change in the mental health space. I can't advocate for any of that if I didn't focus on my personal process of healing, process of being of service, and my mental health hygiene. And every day I need to get up and say, what can I do for myself out of self-love, out of gratitude, out of appreciation, as a suicide survivor who's become a mental health advocate, to further be of service and to further support the cause relating to helping people find parity, equality, and equity of mental health support. It came from crisis, it came from trauma, it came from grief. And through it all, my healing is being here on this stage in front of you. And I so deeply appreciate that privilege to be here today, to fly across the country, fly across the world and drive across the country to be here. Because this is what it's all about. This is living. And I want you to know that. I am filled with joy to be here today. That's all. Thank you.